Waver Velvet is an orphan and a third-rate mage at London's Clock Tower, a prestigious school for young mages. He was always convinced he was a genius. Lord Kayneth El-Melloi, his professor, dismissed his stupidity and ripped up his theories. He stole Lord Kayneth's Relic, an artifact that can summon a great hero from the past to take part in the Fourth Holy Grail War, determined to prove him wrong. However, he was completely destroyed during the fight, losing both his servant Iskandar and his professor. Months after the war ended, Waver decided to travel the world in search of clues on how to resurrect his former servant Iskandar in time for the next war 10 years later. During his journey, he is apprehended and reunited with his friend Melvin Waynes, the rich kid in his class. They manage to flee, and on the way back, Waver asks Melvin for a small loan in the millions of dollars to purchase the rights to return to the clock tower and his professor's research. He wishes to resurrect his professor's special classes because he feels responsible for his teacher summoning a weak hero who died during the war. Reens, his professor's niece, kidnaps Waver 3 years later and forces him to sign a contract. Waver is perplexed as to how he did not die during the war, but his uncle did. Waver explains how he survived the war and rose through the ranks to become a well-known teacher in the clock tower. Reens eventually reveals that she is the late professor's successor, and since Kayneth is no longer alive, she will take his place as one of the lords in the clock tower. But there's a catch. She's too young to be a leader. So she asks Waver to keep the seat warm until she is old enough to do it herself, while also collecting enough money to pay off her faction's debt, as her family went bankrupt after Waver stole his professor's relic. Waver accepts the offer and requests that the second be added to his new name in honor of the late Lord Kayneth. As a result, Waver is elevated to the rank of Lord El-Melloi II, succeeding his previous mentor. Waver has been teaching as a professor in the clock tower for a few years now, but that isn't enough to pay El-family Melloi's debt, so he also works as a mage on the side. As a practitioner and lecturer of El-Melloi's modern mage craft theories, he is an expert in modern magic and investigates cases involving it. This is to help him better understand and excel in his field. One morning, Reens asks him to look into the death of Ernest Fargo, who died suddenly for unknown reasons. So Waver accepts the position, accompanied by his trusted assistant and apprentice, Gray, whom he despises because she resembles Saber. The group arrives at the Fargo mansion and enters, where they meet Mary, his former student, and the other two members of the family, Fernando and Alec. Waver examines the house and discovers that it was built specifically for him to use as a workshop for an experiment. Mary explains that his father attempted but failed to reach eternity. While they are investigating, the maid informs them that Alec has been murdered. Waver concludes that the perpetrator is the house itself after investigating Alec's body. The magic symbols are activated, and Ernest appears. He asks for Mary's life because he needs to kill people to achieve immortality, but Waver orders Gray to kill him. Gray activates her cage, allowing her scythe weapon to be released. Ernest attacks her, but the magic is absorbed by the scythe. Gray pursues Ernest while chanting her ability. When she sees an opening, she pursues and destroys the spirit, absorbing all of the malevolent mana in the house. Waver learns a few days later that his favorite tea house has been closed due to an electrical malfunction. The owners inform them that they dispatched an extermination team, but one of the exterminators did not return, and the other was traumatized by what he witnessed. Waver requests permission to investigate and proceeds down the sewers. He discovers that a mage has turned the entire sewer into a testing ground. A beast, however, attacks him from behind, knocking him out. His students discovered him unconscious sometime later. Waver explains that the beast was created by a mage and that it survives on electricity. Flat instructs Sven to transport Waver to the hospital while he and Gray deal with the mage who is the source of the electrical monster. Gray and Flat are in trouble, but Waver arrives to help them. Another prominent mage in their ranks, Sir Geldova Davenant, is recognized by Waver. He informs Davenant that he is being arrested for his crimes against humanity, particularly the introduction of an electrical monster into the world. However, while drinking his tea, Waver is handed another case by Reens. Waver and the gang meets with Wills, who's also a lecturer in the tower. His father, Sir Trevor Pelham Codrington, was a grand necromancer, but has recently died from getting hit by lightning. Wills asks for Waver's expertise regarding spiritual evocation and to solve the mystery surrounding his father's death. A few years ago, Trevor Codrington created the Marbury Workshop, but the workshop ran out of control, which caused the lightning strikes to randomly kill civilians who happened to pass by its range. According to Waver, the ley line was severed, which caused the malfunctions in the workshop, but he needs to investigate further. Upon arriving at the mansion, Wills gets entangled by a white snake who transforms into a bind. Ms. Adashino, a colleague of Waver, appears and introduces Waver to Willetta Codrington, who's going to own the land if Wills can't do something about the lightning strikes as well as his father's death. Willetta quickly points out that Wills is the reason for the lightning strikes as well as the fact that he tried to call on his father, but Waver dismisses her reasoning. But Waver decides it needs a proper investigation. After some time, Waver learns that Wills can see fairies through his eyes, and every time the fairy appears, someone dies. Later, a Japanese freelancer mage, Kari Shishigu, appears in the house, providing them with new information. Upon hearing it, Waver heads out of their room to check something out. Later that night, Gray wakes him up and informs him that Willetta got hit by lightning. Wills tries to call Willetta's soul, and Adashino points out that Wills gains the most from her death, but Waver dismisses her claims. Adashino complies and decides to imprison Wills for the time being. Later, Shishigu informs Waver that they've been attacked by a black dog, another lightning beast. He then adds that Gray's code was feared by the dog and inquires about the weapon. Wills tells him that Gray's weapon is actually King Arthur's weapon. Wavers goes on to talk about Gray's origin, and Shishigu adds that King Arthur is the king of ghosts and fairies. Waver checks everything and starts performing a ritual using Reen's mystic eyes in conjunction with Will's fairy eyes. By performing the ritual, they're able to communicate with the fairy, who tells them that she killed Trevor. Waver reveals that the workshop is a giant murder machine, designed by Trevor to kill people. The lightning strikes weren't random, they're premeditated murders. The fairy tells them that Trevor deceived her, and used the fairy's cores to supply the workshop machines. After confirming everything, Waver casts some magic, activating the workshop and summoning a gateway, a portal to the... This gateway let the dogs out in the open, attacking the mages. Gray, Shishigu, Waver, and Wills all go into action to intercept the dogs, while Adashino defends the mansion. Although they manage to trim the numbers, there are still dogs spawning endlessly. Waver asks Gray to use her power, and Gray activates her abilities to summon her weapon, the legendary Spear of King Arthur. Once the pack leader is within a few meters of Gray, she thrusts the legendary spear, piercing the dog and the portal, creating a massive explosion. However, the portal isn't destroyed, so Will steps forward to destroy the portal and joins the fairy. In the aftermath, Adashima gives Waver some documents concerning Rail Zeppelin, a phantom train that buys and sells mystic eyes. A few days later, Waver informs Gray that his relic of Iskandar was stolen from him, and the only clue is a letter with an invitation to the Rail Zeppelin, asking her to come with him. Waver arrives at the train station with Calls, another one of the students, Gray and Adashino. There they see prominent figures from the tower, who will most likely buy something from the expensive Zeppelin's auctions. Inside the train, he gets another letter, which follows up on the previous letter he received after getting his relic stolen. The daughter of Lord of Astromancy, Animusphere, appears and informs him something about the Holy Grail War. This piques his curiosity, as this is what Waver's been after for the longest time, expecting to reunite with his former hero. They talk about how there's speculation that Iskandar won't be able to remember Waver from the past war. A few moments later, Waver and Gray suddenly hear a scream and head to the location to check it out, just to find out that Trisha, the one who just talked to Waver, has been murdered. She has been beheaded, and the culprit is nowhere to be found, as well as Trisha's severed head. A member of the Holy Church, usually a natural enemy of every mage in the train, examines the body. After examining, Father Karabo informs them that Trisha has been killed recently. Waver points out that she's probably targeted due to her having the mystic eyes of premonition, a powerful set of eyes that can predict the future. They try to interrogate Karabo, who's a wielder of the mystic eyes of the past, but he tells them that he can't see the past from Trisha's state. Waver can't point it out, but something doesn't add up, so he leaves Olga in Gray's care while he's investigating. He meets up with Adashino, and she gives hints about the previous cases Waver has handled before having a connection to this case. While discussing things with Gray, a lightly armored woman appears and attacks them. Gray intercepts the woman, and Waver realizes that the woman is a ghost liner, a materialization of a heroic spirit, basically a fake copy of the heroes. The woman activates her eyes, turning Gray against Waver. As Gray's about to slice Waver in half, but the side that activates its cleansing power, unbinding the woman's control over. The woman then summons Gordius Wheel, Iskandar's noble phantasm. She detests Waver's affiliation with Iskandar and renounces Waver's master role over Iskandar, introducing herself as Hephaestion, Iskandar's prime confidant, as she lands a finishing blow against the two. Gray tries to attack Hephaestion, but Waver stops her from doing so, taking her electrical attack. Calls manages to save them just in time, but Waver falls unconscious. 2 days after the fight, Waver wakes up and interrupts Adashino from falsely accusing Karabo of murdering Trisha. But Adashino still pins Karabo for murdering Trisha, even though she lacks evidence. The Zeppelin spirit takes Karabo's eyes and places it under their auction inventory. Waver interrogates Karabo, asking the priest about his involvement in the serial murder 7 years ago. However, Karabo reveals that he doesn't remember anything because his mystic eyes have been controlling his body since he got them. Waver decides to buy Karabo's eyes, asking for Melvin's help once again, who happens to stumble into the train. Gray tells Waver that she saw Trisha wearing a pendant, which Waver declares is the key to solving the mystery of the murder. Waver strikes a deal with Olga, and the two collaborate to ramp up the prices of the mystic eyes in the auction. As the two talk about the Holy Grail War, Waver learns that Olga's father stopped going for the Grail because he later found out that the Holy Grail itself is useless against the Greater Grail. He reveals to Olga that Trisha was investigating the matter simply to know why Olga's father stopped loving her. After piecing out the information he has, Waver attends the auction to bid for the mystic eyes. While on break, Waver asks for Melvin's help again. Once the auction resumes, Waver goes on a bidding war against Adashina, but as he's losing it, he stops and reveals the truth about the assassinations, including Trisha's. Calls appears while bringing out Trisha's head, which Olga found yesterday. Waver explains that the serial killings 7 years ago are similar to Trisha's case, and being beheaded doesn't mean they're dead. The purpose of the beheading is to take their heads to use the mystic eyes freely without taking it off of the owner's head. Trisha's eyes open and suddenly, Calls gets bound, revealing him to be Heartless, the serial killer mage that manipulated Father Karabo to murder mages 7 years ago. Dr. Heartless commands Waver's intellect and perception, but then summons the ghost liner, Hephaestion, to battle. Hephaestion attacks Adashino, knocking her out, and Heartless reveals that Hephaestion's class is called Faker, a residual copy of a noble hero. Heartless requests to open up Pandemonium where they'll battle against Waver and Gray, and returns the relic of Iskandar back to Waver. As soon as Waver gets the relic, Heartless turns to retreat. But Waver tells Hephaestion that she hated Iskandar's army, and that's why she doesn't have any given name. Faker gets angry and goes after Waver. Gray becomes his shield so that Waver can talk trash about her. Faker gets past Gray and attacks Waver. Luckily, Calls made it just in time to restrict her movement. Heartless summons the forest of Inishi, but the Zeppelin crew shoots it down, together with the mages working together to destroy it. The train stops and Father Karabo is in front of Gray to kill Heartless but loses to Faker. Faker then attacks Gray, but thanks to Waver's intervention, Gray manages to injure her. Faker summons the Gordius Wheel and flies toward Gray in a diving charge. Gray chants her abilities, and Father Karabo advises her to listen to the voices etched within her spear, which will allow her to realize her full potential. As Faker delivers the Hecatic Wheel, Gray summons King Arthur's spear, unleashing a bright yellow ray of energy that completely destroys Faker and Heartless. Waver returns home and fantasizes about Iskandar, finally finding a new purpose in life and letting go of the past. So, that's it for today. Make sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Take care and goodbye.